Good day, everybody. This is Chris with the Ancient Scholar, and today I'm going to be talking about how we calculate the difficulty of an item. And again, the focus of this particular grouping of videos will be on multiple choice items. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So when we talk about the difficulty of an item, what we're talking about is how difficult is a question for a group of people. And that's a very important concept, that we're looking at a group of people. So we have multiple people that take an exam. What we do, or what we'll need to do, is we'll need to look at every individual item and find the difficulty of the individual items. So typically we're used to working with a test as a whole, like what's the average score, like what's the average score on the exam as a whole. But now what we're doing is we're looking at every individual item and we're saying, how difficult was this particular item for this particular group of people? And the cool thing about item analysis is the more people that take our exam or are exposed to our item, that equates to more data, and that gives us a better idea of the difficulty. If only 5 people have taken a specific item or have been encountered a specific item, then the difficulty that we calculate from those 5 people, there's going to be significantly more uncertainty surrounding that difficulty, or surrounding the how confident we are that that difficulty is a good representation for a large population, versus a situation where perhaps 100 people have been exposed to an item, and the difficulty that we get when 100 people have been exposed to an item, in general, there's going to be a higher degree of confidence that that difficulty is more reliable than when only 5 people have taken it. So again, groups of people is a very important concept when it comes to difficulty, and in fact, it's very important when it comes to virtually all components of item analysis. Things just get better, and they should get better and better and better as more and more people take our exams, and we make changes, and we really zero in on the best questions that we can get. Okay, so how do we identify the difficulty of each item? Well, the difficulty, calculating the difficulty, is actually very easy. All right, this is the difficulty. Some people may call this the difficulty index, or the index of difficulty. We'll just call it the difficulty. And difficulty equals the number of students or candidates who got the answer correct, okay? Who were correct, all right, divided by the total number of students who were exposed to the item. So the total number of students who were exposed to that item. So for example, let's say that I have 100 students that have taken a test, all right? So that's my total. All right, is 100 students. All right, 100 students have taken that test, and out of those 100 students, 48 students correctly answered that question. All right, so to calculate the difficulty, it's very easy, right? So the number of students who were correct, there were 48 correct students, divided by the total number, that's 100. So 48 divided by 100 gives us a difficulty of 0.48. All right. And that's on one item, okay? So what we'd have to do to find the difficulty is find the difficulty of the entire exam is we need to do that with every item. So that maybe that was item 1. And we got a difficulty of 0.48. And then maybe item 2, we got a difficulty of 0.66. And then item 3, we got a difficulty of 0.21. And then item 4, we got a difficulty of 0.98. Okay? All right, so I just threw some examples of item difficulty there, and then we'll go ahead and talk about what does that mean, okay, in general. Well, when we think about it, I'll draw a little line graph here, if you will. All right, and difficulty goes from 0 to 1. All right, and then we have 0.5 in the middle. All right, and so 0, if I get 0 for my item difficulty, that means 0% of the students who encountered that item were correct. So basically everybody got that question wrong, okay? And that typically represents a highly difficult, that represents a very difficult question. And then 1, okay, a difficulty of 1 would mean that 100% of the students answered that item correctly. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's a ridiculously easy item, right? So that's very easy. And so from 0 up to 1 is ridiculously difficult to ridiculously easy with most of our questions, okay? When looking at the statistics, we would want most of our questions to more or less be in this area right here. We want them to more or less center around a 0.5. And so for in general, okay, this is just a general rule of thumb, when we look at difficulty, we typically look for a question that has a difficulty of about 0.4 to 0.6. Okay, this is kind of an average starting point. That means 40 to 60% of the students that encounter this item will get this item correct. And that kind of makes sense from a statistical standpoint when we look at a Gaussian distribution. If we're wanting to have a good normal distribution, right, on our exam, you're going to see something like this on the individual items. Again, we're looking at individual items here, right? So, this is 0.5, 0.6, 0.4, right? And so you have a good, okay, you're representing a good chunk of your students here, okay? If you are shooting for a 0.4 to 0.6 with your outliers, okay, you have outliers here, very, very difficult questions, and you have your outliers here, very easy questions. Okay, so again, just a general rule of thumb. And so we can kind of come down to some other general rules, and then basically, if we have a difficulty that's less than 0.3, these tend to be very difficult. These tend to be too difficult. All right, so less than 0.3 tend to be too difficult. All right, and greater than or above 0.8 tend to be questions that are too easy. All right, so if we have questions where in our exam that have difficulties that lie outside of this range, either higher or lower than this range, we want to be rather judicious about having those questions in our exam. We certainly would want to include some difficult and some easy questions, but we would want the majority of our questions to be in that 0.4 to 0.6 range. These very hard and very easy questions tend to be less reliable. All right, these tend to be less reliable for our exam. However, we would still want to include some of each to appeal to a broad range of students. So when we go here, okay, this question here has a difficulty of 0.48, okay, which lies on the lower end of the general range that we use. So these are questions that about 48% of the entire of the students that encountered that item got correct. Okay, so that's a little more on the difficult end of the range. 0.66 is just a little higher than the 60%, so 66% of the students that encountered this question got it correct. So it's a little on the easier end of the range, a little outside of the range. 0.21, however, is a very difficult question, and only 21% of all the students got that question correct. And then 0.98 is a very easy question, and that is 98% of the students got that question correct. Okay, so that's how we calculate difficulty, but that's not the entire story. The next thing that we need to do is, once we find a question and we recognize that a question is either more difficult than it needs to be or less difficult than we want it, okay, we need to ask ourselves, why is it too difficult or too easy? Okay, and there are some very basic and some more nuanced reasons why that may be the answer, okay? And that comes down to the actual item itself. So if you have an item that is well outside of that range, it may be a good item. You may still include it, but you want to look at it, and you want to look at, first of all, you want to look at the stem, and you want to make sure that the stem is written in a way that's understandable. Perhaps the stem is confusing, or it's misleading, or it uses language that is perhaps unfamiliar to your group of students, or it uses abbreviations that may be unfamiliar, or maybe there are some grammatical issues and it's misleading in that way. So you want to look at the stem and you go, okay, could the difficulty be in the way that the stem is written? Okay. The next thing you want to do is you want to look at your distractors. Okay, are your distractors written in a way that may be confusing? Perhaps the distractors are too easy or too hard. And when I say a distractor is too easy, that is to say that it is very easy to rule out. A student looks at that and goes, oh, that's clearly could not be the answer. Want distractors that are reasonably, that could, if you weren't well versed in the exam material, you want a distractor that looks like it could be a potential